Hello lads, welcome back to my channel. Today I had an idea for a video and it's 5 underrated books that you need to read. Just to preface, before we get into this, I'm not saying you've never read any of these books. I'm not saying that I'm the only person who's read these books. I'm just saying in my time on booktube, before I even started making videos and I was just a long time lurker, I don't think I've heard anyone talk about any of the books that I'm going to mention, and all 5 of them are some of my all-time favorites. So I just wanted to have an excuse to talk about them, really. Try to encourage other people to give these a chance and pick them up, and maybe recommend something that hadn't come your way before, which is, again, what we're doing here. It's just all about the book recommendations for me. I would love if you commented down below what would be on your list of 5 top underrated books that you want people to read so badly. I think it's just like a really interesting prompt for a video and a good litmus test for if you would recommend a book to someone. So let's get into it. Start talking about some books. I wanted to start out this video with probably what is my favorite book of all time. So high stakes. If there's one takeaway, please pick this up. It is phenomenal. It's called Vanishing Twins of Marriage, collection of essays and prose by Leah Dietrich? I don't know. She actually lives in Portland, and I follow her on Instagram, and I saw her at a restaurant once and I almost went up to her, but I didn't. It essentially tells her story through childhood to adulthood, where she meets her husband and partner Eric, and kind of explores the framework of evolving as the self and evolving as a couple, and the duality of that experience and how they converge and go away from each other at the same time. It's really beautiful. She interweaves dance and ballet and pop culture, all to explore the concept of fluidity and sexuality and queerness and her open marriage, which I think is one, so generous and brave to the reader. I think that's still something that's really stigmatized, at least in America. And as a queer woman who is about to be married to a man and be presumably, you know, straight assumed or straight passing for what is going to be the rest of my life if we stay married, it was just like such a refreshing take on queerness and sexuality. Really beautiful metaphoric writing, such a complex look at identity and gender and psychology as a whole. I love this book. You should read it if any of that sounds interesting to you. 5 out of 5 from me. Next up, I have a piece of fiction. It's a novel called The Deeper the Water, the Uglier the Fish. I think this is actually classified as a mystery, but I'd say it's a piece of literary fiction with some mystery elements. It's not a whodunit or anything like that. This book is phenomenal. It reminds me of the movie Hereditary, not in anything about the plot, but just because it has haunted me and stuck with me for a year after I've read it, and I still think about it all the time. It essentially follows 2 sisters moving through some trauma around losing their mom, and it kind of dives into the magnitude of craving parental attention and tension between love and obsession, and it's reflected back on their parental relationships, which is really interesting. This is like a horrifying, heavy read. I will definitely warn you that this is not a feel-good book in any way, but it is very uncomfortable and dark and tragic. It flips between multiple narrators. There's some really good photography motifs and a through line that you get to the end about photography, which I loved, obviously. I would really recommend this book. It is captivating, dark, sinister, obsessive, and one of my favorite books of all time. Next up, I have Draw Your Weapons. Sarah was actually a professor of mine in art school, which is so cool. She taught for a couple of years at the art school I went to in Portland, which is phenomenal because she's a brilliant critical theorist and writer and author and teacher, and I'm so glad I got to be in her class. I feel really lucky. This is a nonfiction book. It's a series of essays. It's like nonfiction. She weaves some memoir-esque storylines throughout it too, which kept me engaged and had a more interpersonal relationship than just reading like a straight up critical theory book about art. The root of this book, and which was something that her class syllabus centered on when I had her as a teacher, is about violent images, specifically images of war and tortured bodies and hate crimes. It's a lot of things that are unfortunately extremely relevant today, as we're seeing Black men and women killed on camera, shared virally, and how we consume them and process them and how we bear witness to them. This is a phenomenal book. I think it's a must read as anyone who consumes media, which is all of us. We're all consuming media at an all-time rate, and most of it is violent. And this question really frames up the question of who and what for does that serve. It also draws from art theorists like Susan Sontag and John Berger and Walter Benjamin, and frames them in a modern context, specifically the Iraq War and images of Abu Ghraib. It's really, really interesting. I highly recommend this if that appeals to you. Next up, I have a novel called Idaho. I think this is also classified as a mystery, but again, I think I would say this is a piece of literary fiction that has mysterious elements to it. This is a book told through multiple perspectives. It jumps between timelines, exploring a tragic accident and investigating dementia and memory throughout all of it. Our main characters, Anne and Wade, are married. Anne is Wade's second wife, and we're discovering as the book goes on more and more about Wade's first marriage, the traumatic events that led him to where he is today, and how his memory loss impedes his relationship with his wife. This book is dark and a little bit heavy to work through as well, but I think the payoff was well worth it. It was really interesting to me, and I think the author was really good at kind of creating a really descriptive emotional and physical world, and you could really envision Idaho, which is a place I've been. I've been to Boise, but don't really have much more cultural context for it. So it was exciting getting to kind of have that place in our country fleshed out a little bit more. And lastly, I have A Field Guide to Getting Lost by Rebecca Solnit. I love Rebecca Solnit. I think I've read almost all of her books now. This one specifically, most of her books are a collection of essays, and this one is kind of philosophical and also a memoir. They're all kind of introspective essays around the concept of what it means to get lost. And this was just like a very foundational, influential book to me when I was in art school and like 20 years old. I rarely annotate books, but I did in this one, and I haven't read this again since I was in college, but I have a passage underlined that says, "Oh fucking K, pros." So she's just like a very lyrical, beautiful writer. I will always have a soft spot in my heart for this book, and I think it is just like a really good introspective feeling book that kind of makes you abstract the world around you a little bit more. Highly recommend. I love Rebecca Solnit. She's an activist, environmentalist, critical theorist. I think the fact that three out of the 5 books I mentioned are women authors who involve memoir and critical theory is telling, isn't it? I also love Joan Didion. I also love Maggie Nelson. So that's obviously my vibe. I don't see that represented a lot in booktube, so I just wanted to add my 2 cents and thought it would be interesting, and maybe it'll inspire you to pick up some of these books. But that's it. Again, some of my faves of all time here. Let me know in the comments if you have anything to recommend to me or any questions about what I spoke about. I'm happy to elaborate a little bit more. I didn't want to get too in-depth in any of these. It's honestly been a long time since I've read any of these. They all need a reread. I rarely reread books though, but these are all absolutely worthy of getting back into my rotation and spending more time with them. So I'm inspired to do that. I really think that should maybe be a conscious goal in my 2020, you know, June through December reading is at least once a month throw a reread in there. Cool, well, hope you're doing great. Have a good day. See you later.